6 a.m. Fog blankets the lake. I step out in my bathrobe, coffee steaming, and freeze. 3 shadows on my dock, 2 men with measuring tape, and her, Delilah Crescent, HOA president, clipboard in hand, heels sinking into weathered wood. 28 feet, she snaps.
Max is 25. This monstrosity violates policy. 48 hours to remove it, or we seize it.
I choke on my coffee. My $80,000 restored 1950s Chris Craft. Now, monstrosity? New rule. Board voted last night, she smirks, shoving papers at me. We don't explain standards to residents. Tape clicks on hull. Mist swirls. Heels tap impatiently. My blood runs cold. She had no clue. I don't just own the house. I own the lake. 15 years crushing corrupt maritime boards in court taught me one truth. Bullies inventing rules to steal your property usually lose everything. Wrong move, Delilah. What would you do if they tried to seize your boat on your water? Drop your craziest HOA story below. Where you watching from? Lake? Boat ramp? Spill it. So there I was, pajamas and all, watching this woman measure my boat like she was planning a heist. The irony would have been hilarious if I wasn't so pissed. Let me back up. Noah Thornfield, 52, retired maritime attorney who spent 15 years in courtrooms destroying people who messed with waterfront rights. Moved to Willowbrook Lake 4 years ago when my wife Eleanor got diagnosed with breast cancer. Stage 2, aggressive treatment, the whole nightmare. We needed somewhere peaceful for her recovery, and somewhere I could keep my hands busy without losing my mind. Found this slice of paradise. 47 homes around pristine natural water, established 1952 by a developer who actually gave a damn. No HOA drama back then, just neighbors helping neighbors. During Eleanor's worst chemo days, people brought casseroles that smelled like heaven and tasted like hope. Janet Kowalski, this tough Polish lady next door, organized meal trains. Rich Santos at the marina let me use his workshop tools for free. That's where I found my therapy project, this gorgeous 1950s Chris Craft rotting in an estate sale. Bought her for 20 grand, spent 4 years and 60 more bringing her back to life. Second chance seemed fitting. Eleanor would sit on the dock, chemo cap on, watching me sand away decades of neglect while the sound of my vintage orbital sander mixed with lapping water. Marine varnish became my cologne. Teak oil stained my fingernails permanently. But every weekend that boat got a little more beautiful and Eleanor got a little stronger. Here's the kicker though, and why Delilah picked the absolute wrong fight. When I bought this place, my maritime law background kicked in hard. Read every single word of that property deed, including the fine print most people ignore. Didn't just buy waterfront access, bought the whole damn lake. See, original developer Harrison Willowbrook was brilliant. When he established the community in 1952, he kept lake ownership separate from individual house lots. Wanted to prevent some future corporation from turning our swimming hole into a commercial marina or condo development. Smart man. When his son died in 2019, the estate needed a buyer who understood complex water rights law. Enter yours truly. Most neighbors had no clue I owned their favorite swimming hole. Why advertise? Community had operated on 70 years of handshake agreements and common sense. Everyone used the water, everyone kept it clean, everyone got along. Life was good. Then came 2020 and everything changed. New housing development on the North Shore, 24 cookie-cutter homes for city folks wanting weekend lake houses. Nice enough people, but they brought suburban expectations to a place that had always run on trust and neighborly cooperation. That's when Delilah Crescent slithered into our paradise. 58, recently divorced, financially desperate. Her real estate license had been suspended for some shady dealing involving misrepresented waterfront properties. Should have been my first warning. Lost her big suburban house in the divorce settlement, was renting a modest place in the new development, and clearly saw our little lake as her ticket back to easy money. She ran for HOA president on a property values protection platform, promised to establish professional standards and eliminate problems that hurt everyone's investment. The new residents ate it up like free ice cream. The old-timers mostly stayed quiet, figuring she'd burn out after a few months. Big mistake. Within 6 months, Delilah was treating our peaceful community like her personal kingdom, measuring setbacks with military precision, inspecting landscaping like a drill sergeant, sending violation notices for anything that didn't match her pristine suburban aesthetic. The morning mist still rose off calm water like it had for centuries, but now it carried the tension of neighbors afraid to enjoy their own property. The crunch of gravel under her silver BMW became our community's funeral march. But here's the thing about bullies. They always push until they hit something that pushes back harder. This morning, she'd finally found bedrock. Standing there in my bathrobe, watching her lackeys measure my oversized boat with the focused intensity of crime scene investigators, I had to admire her sheer audacity. Takes real balls to try seizing someone's property from their own lake. Time to educate Ms. Crescent about the finer points of waterfront property law. Monday morning, I'm grabbing mail when Janet Kowalski shuffles over with her walker, looking like she'd swallowed something rotten. "Marcus, honey, you hear about that emergency meeting last night?" I hadn't. Turns out Delilah scheduled it for 7 p.m. Monday, right during the high school football championship when half our lake community was packed into bleachers cheering on the Eagles. Real convenient timing for someone wanting to avoid opposition. "Only 9 people showed up," Janet continued, her Polish accent thickening with disgust. "She passed some emergency boat rule, 25 feet maximum, effective immediately. Your beautiful Chris Craft's now illegal, apparently." The smell of fresh coffee from my kitchen suddenly turned bitter. I drove straight to county offices where Mrs. Patterson, who'd been filing documents since the Carter administration, pulled up the meeting notice records, sent Friday afternoon for Monday voting. During my maritime law career, I'd seen this trick before. Emergency meetings scheduled when opponents can't attend with barely legal minimum notice. State law requires 10 days for rule changes affecting property use. Emergencies need genuine threats to health or safety, not aesthetic complaints about vintage boats. But I'd learned that bullies count on people not knowing their rights. Here's where Delilah got sloppy. I checked her Facebook page, Friday night post. "Go Eagles. Can't wait to watch our boys crush Central High tonight." Complete with photos of her tailgating at the very game that conflicted with her emergency meeting. She deliberately scheduled the vote when football fever would keep most residents away. Classic manipulation. Wednesday's regular meeting was standing room only. Word had spread about Monday's sneak attack. I walked in carrying copies of our original 1952 community bylaws, documents most people had never seen, but that established Willowbrook as a recreational boating community with zero size restrictions. The musty smell of old paper mixed with nervous energy as neighbors whispered among themselves. "Good evening, everyone," I said, passing out the historical documents. "I'd like to discuss Monday's emergency resolution and share some interesting facts about our community's original charter." Delilah sat behind the HOA table in her power suit, perfectly applied makeup doing nothing to hide the predatory gleam in her eyes. "Mr. Thornfield, emergencies don't wait for your personal convenience." What exactly was the emergency? My boat's been the same size for 4 years. No accidents, no complaints from Marine Patrol, no safety incidents whatsoever. "Safety overrides procedure," she snapped, consulting her notes like a prosecutor. "Your vessel creates navigational hazards in our residential waters." I pulled out aerial photos of the lake, spreading them where everyone could see. "Ma'am, our water's 200 yards wide at the narrowest point. My 28-foot boat threatens navigation about as much as a goldfish threatens Olympic swimming." Nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. A few neighbors who'd been avoiding eye contact since Monday started nodding. Delilah's face flushed beneath her foundation. "Grandfather clauses don't apply to vessels that pose ongoing dangers to community safety." That's when I stood up, letting my voice carry the authority I'd developed cross-examining hostile witnesses for 15 years. "Ma'am, I need you to show me the specific legal authority for imposing retroactive boat restrictions on existing property owners." Silence. The kind that makes wall clocks sound like drum beats. "Furthermore," I continued, "Monday's emergency resolution violated 6 different state-mandated procedural requirements. The meeting was improperly noticed, emergency powers were misused, affected property owners weren't given required input opportunities, and the resolution lacks any factual basis for claimed safety concerns." You could hear people holding their breath. Delilah went full nuclear. Voice rising, hands gesturing wildly. "Your legal background doesn't intimidate this board. We're establishing community standards whether entitled boat owners like it or not." She announced formation of a lake safety committee with herself as chair, complete authority to inspect all watercraft, and power to issue immediate removal orders for non-compliance. The sound of her gavel hitting the table echoed like a declaration of war. After the meeting, the tide had clearly shifted. 3 old-timer families approached me quietly. Tom Brennan, whose family had lived here since 1963, whispered close to my ear, "That woman's got no idea what hornet's nest she just kicked over." Janet was characteristically blunt. "Honey, some of us old folks remember when your property came with special lake rights. Maybe it's time the whole community learned the truth about who really owns what around here." Rich Santos, the marina owner, pulled me aside as people filed out. "Marcus, that Crescent woman was at my dock yesterday asking detailed questions about boat removal costs and winter storage rates. Seemed real interested in pricing for emergency towing services. Just thought you should know." Walking home through the crisp evening air, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Delilah's bedroom light was blazing, and there she stood at her window with binoculars trained on my dock like some suburban spy. I stopped and waved cheerfully. She dropped those binoculars so fast the sound of them hitting her windowsill carried across 100 yards of water. That night, Eleanor fired up her stress baking operation while I researched HOA procedural law online. The kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of vanilla and chocolate chips, while I documented every legal violation from Monday's ambush meeting. "Honey," she said, sliding a plate of warm cookies toward me, "what exactly are we dealing with here? This feels bigger than boat disputes." I took a bite and smiled grimly. Someone who thinks she's playing chess when she doesn't even understand the basic rules of checkers, but she's about to get a master class. The next morning brought certified mail, official-looking HOA violation notice complete with daily fines starting Friday and threats of legal action if I didn't comply within 48 hours. I called Pete Hartman, my old colleague still practicing maritime law in the Capitol. "Marcus," his familiar voice crackled through the phone, "they can't retroactively restrict boats that predate their authority. Basic constitutional law. It's like passing a speed limit and ticketing everyone who drove fast last year." "What about their emergency powers claim?" Pete's laugh was sharp. "Emergency powers are for hurricanes and sewage spills, not aesthetic complaints from control freaks. This woman's about to discover why property lawyers charge what we do." Friday morning brought another surprise. Someone had crept onto my property overnight and posted an official-looking violation notice sign on my dock, complete with fake county seals and threatening language about immediate removal requirements. The cheap laminated paper felt flimsy between my fingers. Amateur hour intimidation tactics. I called county code enforcement. "Did your office issue any boat violations for Willowbrook Lake properties?" "No, sir. We don't regulate recreational boat sizes on private waters. Sounds like you've got an HOA situation, not a county code issue." Perfect. Delilah was manufacturing authority she didn't possess, using fake official notices to intimidate neighbors into compliance. Time to show her what real legal authority looked like. That weekend, I'm out on my dock sanding the Chris Craft's brightwork when unfamiliar footsteps interrupt my morning ritual. Not the friendly shuffle of neighbors stopping by to admire the restoration. These were deliberate, authoritative steps accompanied by the professional click of camera equipment. "Excuse me, sir, marine safety inspection in progress." I looked up to find a guy in a crisp polo shirt with certified marine inspector embroidered across the pocket, clipboard in one hand, expensive digital camera in the other. Behind him stood Delilah, arms crossed like a general surveying conquered territory, wearing the satisfied smirk of someone convinced they'd just played their winning card. The morning air still carried that peaceful mix of lake mist and teak oil that had become my therapy over 4 years of restoration work. Now it felt poisoned by bureaucratic nonsense. "Mind if I ask who requested this inspection?" I wiped my hands on an old rag, already knowing the answer but curious how they'd spin it. "The Willowbrook Lake Homeowners Association has retained our services to ensure all vessels meet current safety and regulatory standards," he replied with rehearsed authority, already snapping photos of my boat like he was documenting evidence at a crime scene. Interesting. During 15 years of maritime law practice, I'd worked with enough real marine inspectors to spot a phony from across the lake. This guy was holding his measuring tape like it might explode, consulting notes that looked suspiciously like he'd printed them off Google 5 minutes earlier. "What's your state certification number?" I asked conversationally, the way you'd ask about the weather. He fumbled with his clipboard, suddenly very interested in his paperwork. I'll need to get back to you on that specific information. Real marine inspectors have their certification numbers burned into memory like their own phone numbers. This was amateur hour. While he wandered around my dock, pretending to understand what he was looking at, I noticed Delilah had brought her entire war council. 2 other HOA board members stood on the shoreline taking notes and whispering like they were planning the Normandy invasion instead of harassing a guy about his vintage boat. Additionally, Delilah announced, consulting what appeared to be a hand-drawn sketch that looked like something my nephew might produce in kindergarten art class. Your dock extends beyond approved community boundaries into designated water space. This constitutes unauthorized encroachment requiring immediate remediation. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. When I'd bought this property, my maritime attorney instincts had demanded a professional boundary survey. My dock sat a comfortable 12 feet inside my property lines, but I decided to let Delilah continue her little theater production. The inspector spent 20 minutes photographing my boat from angles designed to make a perfectly maintained classic look somehow menacing, then handed Delilah an official-looking folder with theatrical ceremony. Complete assessment report will be available Monday morning. After they departed, Delilah's heels clicking triumphantly on the wooden planks, I did what any reasonable person in the digital age would do. I Googled my inspector, Carl Brenner, 0 marine certifications, no inspection training credentials, no business license for marine services, but plenty of Facebook photos showing him grilling burgers at family barbecues with a familiar face. My dear HOA president, brother-in-law running a fake inspection scam, billing the community $800 for what amounted to an expensive photo session. Monday's professional marine assessment was a masterpiece of incompetent fraud. Entire paragraphs plagiarized from generic boat safety websites, complete with dire warnings about immediate removal pending comprehensive compliance review. The only original content was an itemized bill for services rendered to D. Crescent, HOA account manager. I'd prosecuted insurance fraud cases with more sophisticated documentation, but Delilah was just warming up her persecution campaign. Tuesday brought a special assessment notice demanding $200 from each household to hire legitimate marine safety expertise after my hostile legal intimidation had supposedly compromised their volunteer inspection process. Wednesday delivered threats to suspend my HOA membership entirely for creating an adversarial environment through excessive legal objections. Thursday brought the most brazen move yet. Delilah walking strangers through my yard without permission, describing my property as a problematic investment due to ongoing compliance violations. That's when Eleanor shifted from supportive wife to active co-conspirator. "This lunatic woman is giving tours of our backyard," she announced Friday morning, watching through our kitchen window as Delilah gestured at our structurally questionable dock while some guy in a $1,000 suit took notes. I grabbed my camera and headed outside, the crunch of autumn leaves under my feet mixing with rising anger. "Ma'am, you're trespassing on private property." "I'm conducting legitimate HOA oversight business," Delilah snapped, not even pretending to look embarrassed about bringing strangers onto my land without permission. "Show me exactly what authority grants you access to private property for unauthorized tours with potential buyers." The expensive suit guy was already backing toward his BMW, car keys jingling in his nervous fingers. Nothing kills a property showing faster than angry homeowners shouting about legal disputes and trespassing violations. That evening brought intelligence from our community's most reliable source. Janet Kowalski knocked on our door with news from the neighborhood grapevine. "That Crescent woman approached me again about selling my waterfront lot," she reported, settling into our kitchen chair with a cup of Eleanor's coffee. "Third time this month. Says she's got preferred investors ready to make immediate cash offers for properties without HOA complication issues." The pieces were clicking into place like a perfectly assembled legal puzzle. Harassment campaign targeting specific homeowners, manufactured violations creating artificial problems, pressure to sell to mysterious preferred buyers who'd coincidentally solve all HOA disputes, classic predatory real estate scheme designed to force below-market sales. Eleanor spent Saturday morning researching Delilah's professional background while I documented every trespassing incident, fake inspection detail, and procedural violation from the past 2 weeks. The rhythmic clicking of computer keys mixed with gentle water lapping against our dock as we methodically built our counterattack. "Marcus, look at this!" Eleanor called from her laptop screen. 3 separate consumer protection complaints about misrepresented waterfront properties. Real estate license suspension for failure to disclose material defects affecting property values. This woman's not just incompetent, she's a repeat offender with a documented pattern. Sunday morning, I filed a comprehensive complaint package. Unlicensed marine inspection fraud to State Consumer Protection Bureau, repeated trespassing violations to County Sheriff's Department, financial irregularities and procedural misconduct to State HOA Oversight Board. Monday's special assessment vote was scheduled for 7 p.m. But this time, I'd be arriving with substantially more ammunition than procedural objections. Time to dismantle Ms. Crescent's little empire brick by brick. Monday night's special assessment meeting was a spectacular failure for Delilah. I arrived early, watching homeowners trickle into the community center slower than winter honey. By 7:15, only 11 of 47 residents had shown up. The half-empty room echoed with nervous coughing and the uncomfortable shuffle of people avoiding eye contact. Delilah stood at the front podium like a general addressing defeated troops, her confidence visibly cracking as she realized her grand financial scheme was dying from lack of participation. "Well," she announced, consulting her agenda with theatrical authority, "we'll proceed with available membership." "Actually, you won't." I stood from the back row, folder in hand, voice carrying the courtroom authority I'd developed over 15 years. State law requires majority approval from all homeowners for special assessments. That's 24 votes minimum, not just whoever feels like showing up tonight. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flush creeping up her neck. Mr. Thornfield's constant legal intimidation is exactly why we need professional oversight. That's when Janet Kowalski, bless her stubborn Polish soul, raised her arthritic hand from the front row. "Honey, the only intimidation happening is you photographing our boats and bringing strangers through our yards without permission." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the sparse crowd. The tide was finally turning. By Wednesday, Delilah had completely lost her composure. In desperation, she filed a complaint with county code enforcement claiming I was operating a commercial-sized vessel in residential waters, apparently hoping government officials might accomplish what her amateur hour inspector couldn't. Friday morning brought footsteps on my dock while I was checking mooring lines. County inspector with official clipboard looking professionally bored as he approached my boat. "Someone reported a 40-foot commercial vessel," he said, glancing at my clearly marked 28-foot Chris craft with obvious confusion. "Either my measuring tape's defective or somebody's been filing creative reports." The morning air carried that crisp October smell of dying leaves mixed with lake water. Peaceful until bureaucracy came knocking. "Mike Rodriguez," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Marcus Thornfield." Then I caught his name. "Wait, Mike Rodriguez from State University Law School?" His face lit up with recognition. "Marcus, room 247, Constitutional Law with Professor Harrison, circa 1998. What are the odds?" We'd been study partners 25 years ago, lost touch after graduation when life scattered us to different careers. He'd gone into municipal code enforcement. I'd chosen maritime law. Now here we were, reunited over HOA nonsense. "Still causing problems for bureaucrats, I see," he grinned. "Only the ones who deserve it. This whole thing's harassment disguised as safety concerns." Mike's inspection took exactly 15 minutes. My boat exceeded every county standard, my dock was properly permitted, and the complaint contained multiple factual errors, including impossible measurements and fabricated commercial usage claims. "Want some advice from an old friend?" he said, handing me an official clearance letter stamped with county seals. "Document everything. This systematic harassment pattern usually ends with someone getting sued into bankruptcy or arrested for filing false reports." That clearance letter was pure legal gold. Written proof that actual government officials had investigated Delilah's claims and found them completely baseless. But clearing my boat only made her more desperate and reckless. Thursday morning brought the nuclear option. Delilah launched violation campaigns against every waterfront property owner she could target. The Hendersons' pontoon boat, 22 feet of floating family fun, suddenly violated mysterious noise ordinances. Janet's fishing boat required environmental impact assessment. Even Rich Santos got served papers claiming his 40-year-old marina violated commercial activity restrictions, despite operating with proper permits since 1978. The community was finally witnessing Delilah's true character. This wasn't about safety or property values. It was naked power hunger dressed up as civic responsibility. Eleanor had been conducting her own investigation through strategic coffee dates and grocery store intelligence gathering. Friday evening, she transformed our kitchen table into detective headquarters, spreading research documents and timeline charts like she was solving a federal case. "Look at this pattern," she said, her finger tracing connections across her homemade map. "Every family receiving violation notices owns prime waterfront that's been visited by her mysterious investment partners. The inland houses, zero violations, zero harassment, zero problems." The aroma of her chamomile tea mixed with the satisfaction of watching a complex puzzle reveal its solution. "She's running a textbook property pressure scheme," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining excitement. "Create artificial compliance problems, then miraculously offer solutions through friendly buyers who can make HOA troubles disappear." Saturday morning, I was replacing a weathered dock board when car doors slammed in my driveway. Delilah emerged from her silver BMW accompanied by two men wearing suits expensive enough to finance small boats. The sound of hammer blows on wood mixed with approaching footsteps and my rising anticipation. "Gentlemen, this is the problematic vessel we discussed," she announced, pointing at my pristine Chris Craft like it was evidence in a felony trial. "Owner refuses compliance despite multiple official violation notices." I walked up from the water, hammer still in hand, wood chips scattered across my work clothes. "Morning, folks. You're on private property. Mind sharing who you are?" The suits exchanged nervous glances. The taller one produced a business card. "Lakefront Investment Opportunities, LLC. Real subtle. We understand you might consider selling," he said with practiced smoothness. "We offer immediate cash settlements above market value, assuming HOA compliance issues can be resolved through cooperative ownership transitions." "What compliance issues would those be?" Delilah practically vibrated with eagerness. "Ongoing violations affecting neighborhood property values. These problems disappear completely with proper ownership management." I smiled slowly. "So you manufacture problems, then conveniently sell solutions?" More uncomfortable glances. The investors were already edging toward their BMW. "We'll be in touch," one called over his shoulder as they beat a hasty retreat. After their departure, I called County Sheriff Dispatch. Time to add attempted property fraud to my growing documentation file. By Sunday evening, the community grapevine was electric with similar stories. 3 more waterfront families had received identical visits from lakefront investment opportunities, always preceded by fresh HOA violations, always offering quick cash contingent on resolving compliance concerns through sale. That night, I sat on my dock watching autumn stars reflected in dark water, listening to Eleanor's therapeutic baking operation running at full capacity in our kitchen. The peaceful sound of small waves against weathered wood mixed with distant oven timers, and the deep satisfaction of watching an elaborate fraud scheme collapse under its own greed. Delilah had just made her fatal error. She'd connected herself directly to the investment conspiracy, documented it with multiple witnesses, and revealed the entire scheme's mechanics in broad daylight. Time to trigger my carefully prepared trap. Monday morning, I woke up with one burning question. What exactly had I bought when I purchased this lakefront property? After watching Delilah parade her investment partners through my yard like she owned the place, I needed more than procedural complaints and fake inspector evidence. I needed to understand the true legal landscape of our little war. The county courthouse smelled like old documents and fluorescent lighting, familiar territory for someone who'd spent 15 years researching property disputes. Mrs. Patterson, the records clerk who'd been filing deeds since the Carter administration, greeted me with professional curiosity. "Willowbrook Lake Research," she mused, fingers dancing across her computer keyboard. "Haven't had anyone dig into those particular files in years. Most folks just assume lake access comes automatic with waterfront property." Something in her tone made my lawyer instincts prickle. She disappeared into the archives, returning with banker's boxes that looked older than my marriage. "Here's your original 1952 development documentation. Fascinating reading if you understand what you're looking at." The papers felt brittle under my fingers, carrying the musty scent of decades-old legal agreements. I spread them across her counter, scanning through standard property language that most people would find duller than watching paint dry. Then I hit paragraph 7 of the original land development agreement, and my world tilted sideways. "Harrison Willowbrook hereby retains all riparian rights to lake bottom, water column, and regulatory authority in perpetual trust for recreational preservation, said rights transferable only to qualified maritime legal practitioners." My coffee went cold as I read the sentence 3 times, making sure I wasn't hallucinating. "Mrs. Patterson," I said carefully, "show me what happened to these rights in 2019. She pulled up the estate transfer documents, and there it was in black and white. Complete conveyance of Willowbrook Lake ownership, including all regulatory and access authority to Noah Thornfield, Esquire, qualified maritime attorney, effective upon closing." The fluorescent lights seemed too bright suddenly. The familiar courthouse sounds faded into background static as the implications crashed over me like a tsunami. I didn't just own lakefront property. I owned the entire lake. Every dock, every boat slip, every square inch of water that Delilah had been regulating belonged to me. She'd been playing dictator on my private property for 2 years, collecting fees for managing my lake, issuing violations for activities happening on my water. "This means," I started, then stopped, my legal mind racing through the cascading consequences. "Means that HOA's been impersonating authority they never possessed," Mrs. Patterson finished with a satisfied grin. "That Crescent woman was in here 3 months ago asking about development potential and commercial zoning regulations. I wondered when someone would finally connect these particular dots." My hands were actually trembling as I held the documents. Every violation notice Delilah had issued was a violation of my property rights. Every fee she'd collected was theft. Every threat she'd made about boat seizures was attempted theft from my own waters. The beautiful irony hit me like a sledgehammer. She'd been trying to seize my boat from my own lake. "I need certified copies of everything," I managed. "The 1952 original agreement, the 2019 transfer, current survey maps, everything." "Already printing," she smiled. "Been waiting 2 years for proper lake management to return. That woman's been a menace to everyone who understands real property law." The drive home felt surreal. I kept glancing at the certified documents on my passenger seat like they might disappear. Delilah thought she was battling a difficult homeowner with an oversized boat. She had no idea she'd declared war on the actual lake owner. But this revelation came with enormous responsibility. 46 families had bought waterfront property assuming permanent lake access. They'd built docks, bought boats, created memories, all based on the reasonable assumption that lakefront meant lake rights. I couldn't punish an entire community for one woman's fraud. The solution crystallized as I pulled into my driveway. I could dissolve the HOA's manufactured water authority while simultaneously granting formal access easements protecting everyone's legitimate use. Eliminate Delilah's imaginary jurisdiction without harming innocent neighbors who'd done nothing wrong. That evening, Eleanor and I sat on our dock watching sunset paint the water gold, autumn air carrying smoke from distant fireplaces as I explained our transformed situation. "Wait," she said, setting down her wine glass with a clink that echoed across calm water. "Every time this lunatic threatens to seize your boat, she's literally threatening to steal your property from your own lake." "That's exactly right. She's been collecting HOA fees for regulating water that belongs to us, issuing violations for activities on our property, threatening neighbors with loss of access to our lake." Eleanor's laughter started as a chuckle, then built into something approaching hysteria. "This crazy woman picked a property fight with the guy who actually owns the property. It's like trying to evict someone from their own house." The sound of her joy mixed with gentle water lapping against our dock, carrying across the lake we apparently owned. "Marcus," she said finally, wiping tears from her eyes, "what exactly happens Wednesday when she tries to force you to remove your boat from your own water?" I smiled, watching stars begin reflecting in the dark surface of Lake Thornfield. "She's about to discover that some fights you just can't win." Tuesday morning, I sat at my kitchen table like a general planning D-Day, surrounded by legal documents, survey maps, and enough coffee to fuel a small law firm. The plan had to be surgical. Delilah expected me to crawl in Wednesday night, hat in hand, begging for mercy about my oversized boat. Instead, I was about to detonate her entire empire with a stack of certified documents and 46 witnesses. But this wasn't just about revenge. 46 families had built their lives around lake access they'd assumed was permanent. My nuclear option needed to protect innocent neighbors while exposing the fraud that threatened them all. Eleanor emerged from her makeshift command center, our spare bedroom turned intelligence headquarters, carrying her laptop and wearing the intense expression she'd developed while researching Delilah's background. "Marcus, look at this," she said, spreading printouts across our breakfast table. I found 3 identical schemes in other lake communities. Same pattern: systematic HOA harassment followed by investment opportunities from buyers who magically solve all compliance problems through convenient property purchases. The morning sunlight streaming through our windows illuminated her detective work: timeline charts, financial records, complaint patterns that revealed Delilah's operation as part of a larger predatory network. "She's not just corrupt," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining excitement. "She's running a textbook property pressure scheme with professional help." The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the intoxicating aroma of impending justice. My first call went to Rich Santos at the marina. "Rich, I need your conference room tomorrow night. Can it hold 50 people?" "Sure, but what's cooking?" "Community education meeting about lake access rights and property law. Completely boring legal stuff that definitely won't end with anyone getting publicly humiliated." Rich's chuckle carried across the phone line. "Sounds like the kind of boring that leaves Delilah Crescent needing a new hobby." I couldn't possibly speculate about that outcome. Next, I called Mrs. Patterson at the courthouse. "I need you there tomorrow as official witness. Bring whatever documentation proves lake ownership transfers." "Honey," her elderly voice practically vibrated with anticipation. "I've been waiting 2 years for this conversation. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The psychological trap required perfect bait. I drafted an email to Delilah requesting mediation of our boat dispute with neutral community input, suggesting we each present our positions and let reasonable neighbors decide fair lake usage standards. I layered on humble language about finding compromise solutions and being open to reasonable restrictions if properly justified by legitimate authority. She devoured the bait like a starving fish. Her response arrived faster than a pizza delivery. Finally ready to accept community standards, looking forward to presenting HOA's successful lake management policies to concerned residents. This will demonstrate proper leadership versus individual selfishness. She was planning a victory parade in front of the entire neighborhood. Meanwhile, I spent Tuesday afternoon creating visual aids that would make complex property law understandable to regular folks. Simple timeline showing 1952 lake ownership evolution. Clear maps highlighting property boundaries. Flowcharts explaining real authority versus imaginary jurisdiction. 15 years of courtroom experience had taught me that winning complicated cases meant making complex facts simple enough for ordinary people to grasp instantly and remember forever. Eleanor coordinated community outreach through her extensive coffee shop intelligence network. Personal phone calls to all 47 households emphasizing critical information about lake access rights affecting everyone's property values. Janet Kowalski became our secret weapon for reaching old-timer families who remembered original lake agreements but had remained silent during recent conflicts. "About time these newcomers learned how things really work," she declared with Polish satisfaction. Tuesday evening, I walked my property boundaries with surveyor precision, documenting exactly where my legal authority extended. Every dock jutting into water, every boat slip, every swimming platform, all sitting on lake bed that belonged to me. The autumn air carried scents of wood smoke and dying leaves mixed with electric anticipation as I rehearsed my presentation, timing each revelation for maximum psychological impact. Here's what most people misunderstand about legal warfare. The most devastating victories aren't won through aggressive confrontation. They're achieved by giving opponents sufficient rope to hang themselves, then stepping aside while gravity completes the work. Delilah had spent months meticulously documenting her own criminal activity. Violation notices that violated my property rights. Fees collected for regulating my private lake. Threats about seizing boats from waters I owned. She'd created perfect evidence of systematic harassment while believing she was demonstrating effective leadership. Tomorrow night, she'd present that evidence to 50 witnesses as proof of successful community management. The irony was so perfect it hurt. Wednesday morning brought final confirmations that every piece was positioned. County Sheriff agreed to attend as community liaison for property rights education. Regional newspaper confirmed photographer assignment for innovative lake community governance story. State HOA oversight investigator requested invitation after receiving numerous complaints about procedural violations and financial irregularities. The trap was set with professional precision. Eleanor made stress pancakes while I reviewed my presentation notes one final time. The kitchen filled with comforting breakfast aromas while we contemplated the evening's potential outcomes. "What if this backfires?" she asked, flipping pancakes with nervous energy. "What if people side with her despite the evidence? I smiled, remembering similar pre-trial anxiety from countless courtroom battles. Then we'll know our neighbors prefer comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. But somehow I don't think that's going to be a problem. The sound of sizzling batter mixed with distant laughter from kids playing by the lake. The peaceful community life we were fighting to preserve. Delilah would arrive tonight expecting to publicly crush the difficult boat owner who'd finally surrendered to her superior authority. Instead, she'd discover she'd been impersonating law enforcement on private property, while the actual owner documented every illegal action. Wednesday evening would either restore justice to our little paradise or teach me that truth doesn't always triumph over organized corruption. Time to find out which universe we were living in. Wednesday morning, Delilah was riding higher than a kite in a hurricane. Eleanor spotted her at Murphy's Market around 10, practically vibrating with premature victory, while loudly explaining to anyone trapped within earshot how tonight's meeting would finally demonstrate what real community leadership accomplishes when dealing with entitled boat owners. She bought champagne, Eleanor reported over lunch, her voice mixing disbelief with anticipation. Actual Dom Perignon for her post-meeting celebration. This woman's already planning her victory party. Beautiful. Overconfident opponents dig their own graves with industrial efficiency. But Delilah's next move exceeded even my expectations for desperate overreach. At 2 p.m., just 4 hours before our community meeting, she called an emergency HOA board session to pass what she termed a binding enforcement resolution. The emergency vote authorized immediate impoundment of non-compliant recreational vessels following failed mediation attempts. She was so certain I'd surrender tonight that she'd pre-authorized seizing my boat from my own lake. Janet called from the emergency meeting with intelligence that made my blood run cold. Only 6 people showed up, honey, but they passed some insane resolution anyway. That crazy woman's talking about truck convoys tomorrow morning if tonight doesn't go her way. Here's where the mini-twist hit me like a freight train. This resolution didn't just target my Chris-craft, it authorized coordinated removal of all oversized recreational vessels pending comprehensive safety compliance review. She wasn't planning to steal one boat. She was planning to seize boats from multiple families in a single coordinated strike, creating maximum panic and pressure to accept her investors' buyout offers. Manufactured crisis, followed immediately by convenient solutions from friendly buyers who could make all HOA troubles vanish through quick property sales. By 4 p.m., the scope of her scheme became crystal clear. Delilah had contracted with Morrison's Towing for emergency marine vessel removal services, starting Thursday at 7 a.m. She'd also invited 5 additional development consultants to observe tonight's meeting, apparently planning to showcase her enforcement capabilities to a room full of potential business partners. The woman was treating our community meeting like a real estate pitch presentation. Rich Santos called from the marina, his usually calm voice tight with controlled anger. Marcus, you need to hear what just happened. That Crescent woman showed up here 30 minutes ago with some character claiming to be a certified marine property assessor. They were photographing every boat in my marina and asking about long-term storage rates for impounded recreational vehicles. The audacity left me speechless. Did they enter your property? Tried to walk right onto my docks like they owned the place. I told them to take their assessment and shove it, but they took pictures from the public access area. This assessor character was asking detailed questions about costs for storing seized boats indefinitely. She wasn't just planning theft, she was planning to profit from storing stolen property after seizure. The evening's final insult came around 6 p.m. when I spotted movement in my yard. Delilah was conducting another unauthorized property tour, this time accompanied by a man whose expensive suit and predatory smile screamed, "Development investor." He was taking detailed photographs of my dock, my boat, and my property boundaries like he was planning a hostile takeover. I stepped outside, the crisp autumn air carrying the sound of expensive camera equipment clicking away on my private property. "Ma'am, you're trespassing. Again." Pre-meeting documentation to ensure accurate enforcement proceedings, she replied with breathtaking shamelessness, not even attempting to hide her companion's photography session. Under what specific authority? Emergency HOA powers approved this afternoon through proper channels. The photographer looked increasingly uncomfortable as our conversation grew heated, smart man recognizing a bad situation. "Sir," I addressed him directly, my voice carrying 15 years of courtroom authority. You're photographing private property without owner permission. I strongly suggest immediate departure." He was already jogging toward their car before I finished speaking. Delilah's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of rage spreading up her neck. "You cannot intimidate legitimate community oversight with legal threats." "Ma'am, this isn't intimidation. This is basic property law education. You might want to take notes." After their hasty departure, I reported the latest trespassing incident to County Dispatch. Deputy Martinez promised to attend tonight's meeting for community safety oversight, law enforcement code for preventing situations from spiraling completely out of control when authority structures collapse publicly. Eleanor had activated full stress baking mode, our kitchen filling with therapeutic aromas of vanilla and chocolate while she channeled nervous energy into productive cookie creation. "She's completely unhinged," Eleanor observed, pulling perfectly golden cookies from the oven with hands that shook slightly. "Tow trucks, photographers, emergency seizure orders. This woman's planning a military operation instead of attending a neighborhood discussion about boat sizes." The smell of warm cookies mixed with my growing anticipation as I reviewed presentation materials one final time. "Desperate people make catastrophically stupid decisions," I replied. "She knows tonight determines whether her entire scheme succeeds or collapses into federal criminal charges." At 6:45, car headlights began illuminating the marina parking lot as neighbors arrived for what they believed would be routine dispute mediation. I watched from our dock as familiar faces walked toward the conference room, many carrying manila folders containing violation notices they'd received during Delilah's harassment campaign. The evening air carried sounds of car doors, muffled conversations, and the electric hum of 50 people gathering for community business that would determine their neighborhood's future. Delilah arrived precisely at 7 p.m. in her silver BMW, accompanied by an entourage that looked like a hostile corporate takeover. Her attorney, the tow truck operator, 5 development investors, and someone who appeared to be a photographer hired to document her anticipated triumph. She was bringing an entire victory celebration to witness my public humiliation and surrender. Time to give them educational entertainment they'd remember for the rest of their lives. Thursday morning should have been the end of everything. According to Delilah's timeline, this was supposed to be the day I quietly removed my boat under cover of community pressure, accepting defeat with whatever dignity remained. Instead, I woke up to find a formal lien notice taped to my front door. Notice of property. Lien. Outstanding HOA. Violations totaling $8,500 in accumulated daily fines, legal fees, and emergency assessment charges. Payment required within 72 hours to prevent foreclosure proceedings. $8,500 for owning a boat on my own lake. The paper felt flimsy between my fingers. Amateur hour legal intimidation that wouldn't survive 5 minutes of actual scrutiny. But it created an official record of her harassment campaign that would prove invaluable in federal court. Eleanor found me on the dock reading the notice, morning mist rising from calm water while I savored the irony of being fined for using property I owned. "She's completely lost her mind," Eleanor observed, reading over my shoulder, filing liens against the lake owner for using his own lake. By 9 a.m., Delilah had escalated to tactics that bordered on criminal harassment. She'd somehow convinced Morrison's Towing to position trucks at the marina for immediate vessel removal as authorized by HOA emergency powers. Rich Santos called, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Marcus, there are 3 tow trucks in my parking lot right now. Drivers say they have orders to remove non-compliant vessels, starting with your Chris Craft. I told them they're trespassing, but they're not leaving." This was it, her final desperate gamble. Create enough chaos and intimidation to force immediate surrender before tonight's meeting could proceed. But here's where her scheme finally collapsed under its own corruption. When the lead tow truck operator approached my dock, he asked for documentation proving HOA authority to remove boats from private property. Delilah handed him her emergency resolution from yesterday's vote. "Ma'am," the guy said, studying the paper with professional skepticism, "this doesn't give authority to remove property from private waters. We need actual legal seizure orders from courts or sheriff's department." "I am the authority," she screamed, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. "This boat violates community standards and must be removed immediately." The mini twist came when the tow truck operator, who'd apparently dealt with HOA overreach before, demanded to see county authorization for marine vessel seizures. When Delilah couldn't produce it, he packed up and left. "Lady, I'm not risking my license stealing someone's boat based on your say-so," he said, driving away while Delilah stood on the dock, shaking with rage. That's when she made her final, fatal mistake. Around noon, Delilah personally called the Coast Guard to file emergency reports about unsafe commercial vessel operations in restricted residential waters. She claimed my 28-foot restored Classic posed immediate navigation hazards requiring federal intervention. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Marcus Thornfield? This is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Bellamy, Coast Guard Station, Milwaukee. We received reports about commercial vessel violations at your address." "Commander, I think there's been some confusion. I have a privately owned recreational boat that's fully compliant with all federal regulations." "That's what I figured when I saw your name on the complaint. Weren't you the maritime attorney who helped us with that insurance fraud case in 2018? Small world." Sarah had been a junior officer when I'd testified in a federal case involving fake marine accident claims. Now she was handling complaints filed by the woman trying to steal my boat. "Someone filed reports claiming you're operating an unlicensed commercial vessel in violation of federal waters regulations," she continued. "Mind if I swing by for a quick inspection? This complaint has some interesting irregularities." Sarah's inspection took exactly 15 minutes. My boat exceeded every federal standard, my registration was current, and the complaint contained multiple factual errors, including impossible measurements and fabricated commercial usage claims. "Whoever filed this complaint either doesn't understand basic marine regulations or was deliberately filing false reports," she concluded, handing me an official clearance document. "Filing false federal reports is a felony, by the way. Just thought you should know." That afternoon, Delilah attempted one final act of desperation. She scheduled an emergency vote to remove me from HOA membership entirely before tonight's meeting, claiming my legal harassment constituted conduct detrimental to community welfare. The vote failed when only 4 people attended. Even her core supporters were abandoning ship. By 6 p.m., I was sitting on my dock watching the sun set over the lake I owned, listening to Eleanor's final stress baking session echoing from our kitchen. The peaceful sound of gentle waves mixed with distant oven timers and the deep satisfaction of watching an elaborate fraud scheme collapse under the weight of its own illegality. Tonight's meeting would be less confrontation than education, a public lesson about what happens when petty dictators try to regulate property they don't own, targeting people who understand the law better than they do. Delilah had spent 6 months documenting her own crimes while believing she was demonstrating effective leadership. Time to present her evidence to the community she'd tried so hard to control. 7:15 p.m. The marina conference room was packed beyond fire code capacity with every homeowner, half the county government, 2 reporters, and enough tension to power a small city. I'd arrived early to set up my presentation materials, watching through windows as neighbors filed in carrying violation notices, property deeds, and years of accumulated frustration with Delilah's enforcement campaigns. She made her entrance precisely at 7:30, like a queen arriving for her coronation. Silver BMW, professional entourage, and the confident stride of someone absolutely certain tonight would end with total vindication. Her crew included the HOA attorney, 5 development investors wearing identical predatory smiles, someone who appeared to be a professional photographer, and, God help us all, a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket she'd brought for the post-meeting celebration. The woman was planning a victory party. Rich Santos called the meeting to order as neutral moderator, his weathered face showing no emotion as he surveyed the packed room. "Folks, we're here to discuss lake access rights and resolve ongoing boat disputes through community dialogue." Delilah immediately seized control. "Thank you all for coming to witness the resolution of Mr. Thornfield's ongoing resistance to legitimate community standards." She launched into a PowerPoint presentation titled "Successful Lake Management, the Willowbrook Model," that was equal parts self-congratulation and property law fantasy. "Through decisive leadership and professional enforcement," she declared, clicking through slides showing my boat with violation notices, "the HOA has successfully established proper watercraft regulations that protect property values and ensure community safety." Her investors nodded approvingly. The champagne sat ready for opening. "Mr. Thornfield requested this mediation because his position has become untenable," she continued with theatrical confidence. "Tonight we'll demonstrate why community standards must prevail over individual entitlement." I let her talk. For 15 minutes, she detailed every violation notice, every fine, every enforcement action she'd taken against my oversized vessel, and non-compliant property usage. She was providing a complete confession to 50 witnesses. When she finished, Rich turned to me. "Marcus, care to respond?" I stood slowly, folder in hand, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "Thank you, Delilah, for that comprehensive documentation of your activities. Very thorough record-keeping." A few nervous chuckles. "I'd like to ask Mrs. Patterson, our county records clerk, to read something aloud for everyone." Mrs. Patterson stood, opened the original 1952 development agreement, and read in her clear elderly voice. "Harrison Willowbrook hereby retains all riparian rights to lake bottom, water column, and regulatory authority, transferable only to qualified maritime attorneys for recreational preservation." Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Please continue with the 2019 transfer documents," I said. "Complete conveyance of Willowbrook Lake ownership, including all regulatory authority, to Noah Thornfield, Esquire, effective upon closing." The room went dead silent. You could hear the building's ventilation system cycling. "What this means," I said, letting my voice carry to every corner of the packed room, "is that I own the lake." Delilah's face drained of color. "Every dock, every boat slip, every square inch of water that Ms. Crescent has been regulating belongs to me. She's been issuing violation notices for activities on my private property without my permission." The silence stretched until it hurt. "Furthermore," I continued, "every fee she's collected for lake enforcement was theft from property belonging to me. Every threat to seize boats was attempted theft from my waters." I turned to face Delilah directly. "Ma'am, you've spent 6 months trying to steal my boat from my own lake." That's when she exploded. "This is legal trickery," she screamed, jumping to her feet. "Community standards override technicalities. I don't care who owns what. Boats will comply with regulations." "Whose regulations?" I asked calmly. "HOA regulations established by proper authority. You have no authority over my property." The mic drop moment came when Deputy Martinez, who'd been sitting quietly in the back, stood up and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, systematic harassment targeting property ownership constitutes civil rights violations. Filing false federal reports is a felony. Collecting fees for services you can't legally provide is theft." He looked directly at Delilah. "Ma'am, you need to cease all enforcement activities immediately and prepare for investigation of your financial practices." The investors were already gathering their papers and heading for the exit. The photographer had stopped taking pictures. The champagne sat forgotten and warming. Delilah made one final desperate attempt. "This doesn't matter. The community supports proper standards regardless of ownership technicalities." Janet Kowalski raised her arthritic hand. "Honey, sit down. You're done." Applause started slowly, then built until the room thundered with 6 months of accumulated relief. Within 10 minutes, the community had voted unanimously to dissolve the HOA's water authority, remove Delilah from all positions, and request complete financial audits of her activities. I announced permanent lake access for all current residents through formal easement agreements, protecting everyone's legitimate use while ending manufactured harassment. As neighbors lined up to apologize and thank me, Delilah gathered her remaining dignity and departed, leaving behind her champagne, her investors, and her dreams of real estate empire. Justice tasted sweeter than any victory celebration could have managed. Friday morning dawned crisp and clear over Lake Thornfield. Yes, the name had already caught on among neighbors who appreciated both irony and accuracy. Delilah's BMW was gone from her rental property, along with any trace she'd ever lived in our community. Word through the grapevine said she'd fled to her sister's place 3 counties away, leaving behind unpaid rent and a real estate fraud investigation that was gathering federal interest. By noon, the community had accomplished more positive change than we'd seen in 2 years. Without Delilah's manufactured chaos consuming everyone's energy, neighbors were actually talking to each other again about boat safety courses, lake cleanup days, and shared maintenance of our waterfront paradise. Janet Kowalski knocked on our door Saturday morning with coffee cake and a proposal. "Honey, we need proper lake management, not the HOA nonsense. You interested in helping us form something that actually works?" That's how the Willowbrook Lake Heritage Association was born. Voluntary membership, advisory role only, focused on community events instead of enforcement harassment. Our first meeting drew 43 households, more participation than Delilah had managed in 2 years of trying. Within a month, we'd organized the first annual Lake Safety Day. Rich Santos provided free boat inspections and safety courses. The Coast Guard sent educational materials and emergency response training. Kids learned proper life jacket usage while parents discovered their neighbors were actually pretty decent people when nobody was threatening to steal their boats. Eleanor threw herself into property rights education, developing workshops for homeowners facing similar HOA corruption. Her Know Your Rights seminars started at our county library and expanded statewide within 6 months. Turns out other lake communities were dealing with identical pressure schemes involving fake safety concerns and investment fraud. The ripple effects kept spreading. Noah's case became required reading for HOA attorneys across 3 states, a cautionary tale about the importance of understanding actual property law before attempting to regulate other people's water. The state legislature passed the Willowbrook Protection Act, strengthening homeowner rights against HOA overreach and requiring transparent financial oversight. My favorite outcome was completely unexpected. In December, I received a letter from a maritime law student at State University who'd read about our case in a property rights journal. She was writing her thesis on predatory real estate schemes targeting lake communities and wanted to interview Eleanor and me about our experience. That conversation led to the Willowbrook Scholarship Fund, annual awards for law students who commit to protecting small community property rights against corporate exploitation. Our first recipient was Sarah Bellamy, who'd graduated college and decided to pursue maritime law after watching her grandparents fight a similar HOA battle. The technical lessons from our experience proved invaluable for other communities. Always research original property deeds before accepting HOA authority over water access. Document every communication during property disputes. Patterns prove discrimination. Know your state's riparian rights laws. Water ownership often supersedes neighborhood rules. Report systematic harassment to federal authorities, not just local officials who might be intimidated or influenced. 1 year later, our lake community thrives in ways Delilah's enforcement empire never could have achieved. Property values increased 15% due to confirmed permanent water access and cooperative governance. Our Heritage Day Festival draws visitors from across the region who want to see the lake where homeowners beat HOA corruption. Rich Santos reports boat registrations up 40% as families feel secure about their access rights. Local marine businesses recovered completely from the damage Delilah's harassment had caused. Most importantly, kids can enjoy their swimming holes and fishing spots without wondering if some adult will manufacture rules to take their fun away. Eleanor and I still take evening walks on our dock, watching sunset paint the water gold while listening to the peaceful sounds of neighbors enjoying their lake without fear of violation notices or seizure threats. Our Chris Craft second chance floats serenely at her slip, protected by law, community support, and the knowledge that sometimes standing up for what's right protects everyone's freedom. The best part? 3 months after our community meeting, I received a card from Mrs. Patterson at the courthouse. Thought you'd like to know? Received 3 more requests for original property research from other lake communities having boat problems. Keep fighting the good fight. Sometimes one person's courage to research and resist creates waves that protect communities for generations. Here's what I learned. When bullies manufacture crises to steal what's yours, patience and preparation beat anger and confrontation every time. Know your rights, document everything, and remember, the law protects people who do their homework. That 1950s Chris Craft still sits peacefully at my dock where she belongs, now protected by documented ownership, grateful neighbors, and laws that mean something when citizens know how to use them.
So, Delilah's gone. Just packed up and left town after meeting the marina. Didn't even finish out her lease, from what I heard. The part that stays with me, she had Noah believing for a while there that she actually had the authority to do what she was doing. 25-foot boat limit, emergency violation, daily fines. All of it sounded official enough. And that's how these things work, isn't it? Someone shows up with a clipboard and the right tone of voice, and suddenly you're second-guessing what you know to be true about your own property. Noah spent 4 years restoring that Chris Craft, $80,000, all those weekends working on her while Eleanor was going through treatment. And this woman nearly convinced him he would have to get rid of it because some rules she made up on a Tuesday night. The thing is, She probably would have gotten away with it if she'd picked on someone who didn't know how to read a property deed. How many other people in these situations like that just comply, rather than dig into the paperwork and find out what's real and what's not? Have you ever had someone try to convince you that you couldn't do something on your own property? I'm genuinely curious how that played out. Leave me a comment. Look, if this story resonated with you, hit the like button, share it with someone who might be dealing with their own HOA situation. These stories matter, because sometimes the person with the clipboard doesn't actually own the lake.